Hollywood has a dirty little secret. Behind every perfectly lit close-up and every award-winning performance, there are moments the cameras captured that were never supposed to happen. Moments where the line between acting and assault disappeared completely. We're not talking about choreographed stage combat or carefully rehearsed movie magic. We're talking about real, full-force, open-handed slaps across the faces of some of the biggest stars in cinema history, sometimes without their knowledge, sometimes without their consent, and sometimes delivered by the very directors they trusted. Some of these slaps launched careers, others left permanent emotional scars, and a few of them changed the rules of filmmaking forever. These are 9 times the violence on screen was horrifyingly real, and the footage ended up in the final cut anyway. Judy Garland, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Judy Garland was just 16 years old when she stepped onto the set of what would become one of the most beloved films in cinema history. But behind the Technicolor wonder of Oz was a production environment that would be considered criminal by today's standards. During the filming of the scene where Dorothy first encounters the Cowardly Lion, Garland could not contain her laughter. Bert Lahr's physical comedy and exaggerated lion mannerisms were simply too much for a teenage girl to keep a straight face through. Take after take, she broke into giggles. Director Victor Fleming, already under immense pressure from MGM to keep the massively over-budget production on schedule, lost his patience entirely. He pulled the 16-year-old aside, away from the rest of the cast and crew, and slapped her hard across the face. Without a word of comfort or apology, he pointed her back toward her mark and ordered the cameras to roll again. Garland, tears barely held back, delivered the scene. It was not an isolated incident. Fleming was known for his authoritarian style on set, and Garland was already being subjected to a regime of diet pills, sleeping tablets, and grueling 18-hour shooting days enforced by the studio. The slap was just one chapter in what Garland would later describe as the systematic destruction of her childhood by Hollywood. She was a child. He was a grown man in a position of absolute power, and nobody on that set said a word. Sidney Poitier, In the Heat of the Night, 1967. To understand why this scene shook Hollywood to its core, you have to understand the America it was filmed in. It was 1967. The civil rights movement was at its peak. Segregation may have been struck down by law, but in practice, the American South, and much of the rest of the country, still operated under an unspoken racial hierarchy. And in Hollywood, black actors were expected to play their roles within very specific boundaries. Sidney Poitier was about to demolish those boundaries with a single backhand. In the film, Poitier's character, Detective Virgil Tibbs, visits the plantation of Endicott, a wealthy white landowner, played by Larry Gates. During the interrogation, Endicott, offended that a black man would dare question him, slaps Tibbs across the face. In the original script, the scene ended there, but Poitier had negotiated something unprecedented into his contract. If his character was struck, his character would strike back, immediately, without hesitation. When the cameras rolled, Gates delivered a real slap to Poitier's face, and without missing a beat, Poitier wound up and slapped Gates back with such force that the shock on Gates's face was completely genuine. He had not expected that level of intensity. The sound echoed across the set. Nobody moved. When the film premiered, audiences in the South reportedly gasped, walked out, or sat in stunned silence. A black man had slapped a white man on screen in a scene set in Mississippi, and the camera did not cut away. It was the first time many American audiences had ever seen anything like it. The scene became one of the most iconic moments in film history, and it was powered entirely by real, physical contact and the raw defiance behind it. Al Martino, The Godfather, 1972. Marlon Brando was legendary for many things: his talent, his difficulty, and above all, his complete devotion to the unpredictable. On the set of The Godfather, director Francis Ford Coppola gave Brando an unusual amount of freedom to shape his portrayal of Don Vito Corleone, and Brando used every inch of that freedom. In the scene where Johnny Fontaine, played by singer-turned-actor Al Martino, comes to the Don begging for help reviving his failing career, the script called for a tense but verbal confrontation. Brando was supposed to grab Martino by the lapels and scold him. Instead, when the cameras rolled, Brando reached out and slapped Martino squarely across the face, hard enough to snap his head to the side. The slap was not rehearsed. It was not discussed. It was not in any version of the script. Martino, a singer with limited acting experience who was already intimidated by Brando's towering presence, reacted with pure, unfiltered shock. His eyes welled up. His voice cracked. The humiliation on his face was not acting. It was a man who had just been struck without warning by the most famous actor in the world. Coppola kept the camera rolling and, when it was over, kept the take. It became the version audiences saw in theaters. Brando never apologized. When asked about it later, he simply said the scene needed it. Faye Dunaway, Chinatown, 1974. The production of Chinatown was already a pressure cooker. Director Roman Polanski was notoriously exacting. Jack Nicholson was at the height of his intensity, and Faye Dunaway was battling both of them for creative control of her character, Evelyn Mulwray. In one of the film's most pivotal scenes, Nicholson's character, private investigator Jake Gittes, slaps Evelyn repeatedly to force her to reveal a devastating family secret. The scene required Dunaway to cycle through panic, pain, defiance, and finally, a complete emotional breakdown, all while being struck across the face. Dunaway made a decision that stunned the crew. She told Nicholson to hit her for real. She did not believe she could manufacture the kind of raw, involuntary terror the scene demanded through acting alone. She needed her body to react before her mind could intervene. Nicholson agreed. Over the course of multiple takes, he slapped her with full, open-handed force, again and again. Each time, the crack of the impact silenced the set. Dunaway's reactions, the flinch, the reddening of her cheek, the tears that came not from emotion, but from the sheer physical sting, were entirely real. Polanski demanded retake after retake, pushing both actors further. By the time he was satisfied, Dunaway's face was visibly swollen. The final scene is considered one of the greatest dramatic sequences in American cinema, but watching it with the knowledge that every single slap was real transforms it into something deeply uncomfortable. Meryl Streep, Kramer vs. Kramer, 1979. Dustin Hoffman's commitment to realism on set was already the stuff of Hollywood legend, and not always in a flattering way. During the filming of Marathon Man, he had famously stayed awake for days to look convincingly exhausted, prompting his co-star Laurence Olivier to ask, "Why don't you just try acting?" On the set of Kramer vs. Kramer, Hoffman took his methods even further. In Meryl Streep's very first scene in the film, a confrontation between the estranged couple in a hallway. The script called for an intense verbal argument, words only, no physical contact. But Hoffman, without warning and without the consent of his co-star, slapped Streep across the face in the middle of the take. The shock that registers on Streep's face is not a performance. It is the authentic reaction of a woman who has just been struck by a colleague she was not expecting to touch her. Streep was reportedly furious. She confronted Hoffman after the take and made it clear that what he had done was unacceptable. But the damage and the footage were already captured. Director Robert Benton kept the take, and it appeared in the final film. Streep, who was still relatively early in her career at the time, later spoke about the incident with restrained but unmistakable anger, and it became one of the most cited examples in later conversations about the abuse actors, particularly women, have endured in the name of authentic performances. Hoffman's method got the reaction he wanted. The question is whether he had any right to get it that way. Brad Pitt, Fight Club, 1999. David Fincher is a director who will shoot 40, 50, sometimes 70 takes of a single scene to get what he wants. He is meticulous, obsessive, and occasionally manipulative in the pursuit of a perfect moment. During the filming of the scene outside the bar where the narrator, played by Edward Norton, throws his first punch at Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt, Fincher decided that rehearsed choreography was not going to deliver the authenticity he needed. The script called for Norton to throw a fake punch at Pitt's shoulder. Just before the cameras rolled, Fincher pulled Norton aside and whispered a single instruction: "Hit him in the ear." Norton complied. When the take began, he swung, not at Pitt's shoulder, but directly into the side of his head, connecting with his ear at full force. Pitt's reaction was instant and completely real. He staggered, grabbed the side of his head, and shouted, "You hit me in the ear!" A line that was not scripted, was never rehearsed, and ended up in the final cut of the film. The pain on Pitt's face, the disbelief in his voice, and the wild, almost giddy energy that followed were all genuine. Pitt later admitted he had no idea it was coming. Fincher got exactly what he wanted, a scene that felt dangerous, spontaneous, and raw. He got it by turning one actor into an unwitting weapon against another. Jane Fonda, Monster-in-Law, 2005. Not every real slap in cinema comes from directorial manipulation or method acting gone too far. Sometimes it is simply a mistake, but a mistake that leaves a mark. In Monster-in-Law, the comedy starring Jennifer Lopez and Jane Fonda, there is a scene in which Lopez's character finally snaps and slaps Fonda's overbearing future mother-in-law across the face. The scene was choreographed as standard stage combat, a near miss timed with a sound effect designed to look convincing without any actual contact. But during the take, Lopez misjudged the distance. Her open hand connected with the side of Fonda's face at full speed and full force. The sound was unmistakable. Fonda's head snapped to the side, and the look of shock that crossed her face was not acting. It was the genuine reaction of a 77-year-old woman who had just been hit hard enough to see stars. Fonda later confirmed in interviews that the impact left her dazed and that she needed a moment before she could continue. Lopez was reportedly mortified and apologized repeatedly. But when the crew reviewed the footage, the take was undeniably the most authentic and dramatic version they had captured. It stayed in the film. Audiences watching the comedy had no idea they were laughing at a moment that involved real, accidental violence against one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses. Michael Cera, This is the End, 2013. In the apocalyptic comedy This Is the End, the actors play exaggerated, fictionalized versions of themselves. Michael Cera's version is perhaps the most memorable, a wild, coked-up, aggressive party animal who is the complete opposite of his soft-spoken public image. In one scene at James Franco's house party, Cera's character corners Rihanna and makes an unwelcome advance, leading her to deliver a sharp slap across his face. The scene was scripted, but Michael Cera made an unusual request before filming. He asked Rihanna to slap him for real. His reasoning was simple. A fake slap would undercut the comedy. The audience needed to see genuine impact. Rihanna, who was playing herself in the film, agreed. When the cameras rolled, she wound up and delivered a slap with enough force to send Cera stumbling. Cera later revealed in interviews that the impact was far harder than he had anticipated. He temporarily lost hearing in one ear, his vision blurred, and he had to lie down on set for several minutes before he could continue filming. The cast and crew reportedly found the aftermath hilarious, which only added to the chaotic energy of the film. Cera had asked for authenticity, and Rihanna delivered it without holding back. The take was, of course, the one that made it into the film. Margot Robbie, The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013. Before Margot Robbie was a household name, before Barbie, before Tanya, before the 2 Academy Award nominations, she was a relatively unknown 22-year-old Australian actress sitting in a room auditioning opposite Leonardo DiCaprio for Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street. The scene was an argument between Jordan Belfort and his wife Naomi. The script called for shouting, an escalating verbal fight that would showcase whether this unknown actress could hold her own against one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. Robbie delivered her lines with intensity. The scene was building, and then, in a moment she later described as pure instinct, she deviated entirely from the script. Instead of continuing the argument verbally, she stepped forward and slapped Leonardo DiCaprio across the face, hard. The room went silent. DiCaprio stared at her. Scorsese stared at her. Robbie, by her own account, immediately thought she had just ended her career, that she had just assaulted the lead actor and would be escorted out of the building. 9 scenes, 9 real slaps. And one uncomfortable truth that Hollywood has spent decades trying to avoid. Some of the most celebrated moments in cinema were built on real pain inflicted on real people, often without their knowledge or consent. For every story like Margot Robbie's, where a bold, self-initiated choice launched a career, there is a Judy Garland, a 16-year-old girl slapped into silence by a man who was supposed to protect her. For every Brad Pitt laughing it off, there is a Meryl Streep who had to swallow her anger and finish the scene because the power dynamics on set gave her no other option. The question these moments force us to ask is not whether they produced great cinema. They clearly did. The question is whether great cinema is worth the cost. Today, with intimacy coordinators, stricter on-set safety protocols, and a growing cultural reckoning with how Hollywood has treated its performers, many of these incidents would be grounds for immediate termination or legal action. But the footage still exists. It still plays in theaters and on streaming platforms. And every time you watch one of these scenes, you are watching something real, not a performance of pain, but pain itself. And that should make you uncomfortable, because it was never just a movie.